There's a particular kind of quiet that comes after a night you weren't sure you'd survive. It's not peaceful, exactly. Peaceful implies you've relaxed, and I hadn't. Not really. Not with muscles that had spent 12 hours either running or bracing for impact. But it was quiet. The pack had moved off sometime before dawn, and the jungle around us had shifted from its nighttime chorus into something softer. Birdsong, if you could call it that. High, layered notes that didn't quite resolve into melody but weren't far off either. Mist hanging low between the trees, catching the first amber light of Thessera Vex's sun and turning the whole forest the color of old honey. It was, I remember thinking, a genuinely beautiful place, which was a strange thought to have on a planet that had spent 200 years killing everyone who landed on it. Lyra was already awake when I opened my eyes. Had probably been awake for a while, sitting with the same alert stillness, watching the tree line. When she saw I was up, she said something short, gestured toward the slope below the overhang, and started climbing down without waiting to see if I'd follow. I followed. We were heading back to my ship. I didn't know why, not yet. I just knew that whatever Lyra had decided overnight, it involved the wandering dead. And at that point in our acquaintance, going along with Lyra's decisions seemed like the only strategy with a survival rate above 0. The wandering dead looked worse in daylight. Nightfall had hidden the full extent of it, the way the hull had crumpled along the left side like foil, the way one wing had sheared off entirely and lay 40 meters away, half buried in a drift of something that looked like blue moss. Up close, the ship smelled like burnt insulation and the particular bitter tang of coolant fluid, mixed with the thick green smell of the jungle pressing in from every side. Vines had already started climbing the hull, fast growing, the way everything here seemed to grow fast. Thin green tendrils with small white flowers that hadn't been there 12 hours ago. Lyra walked the perimeter of the wreck slowly, methodically, the way you'd walk the perimeter of something you were sizing up rather than something you just watched fall out of the sky. She touched things, the hull plating, the exposed wiring, a cracked viewport. Each time, she'd pause, consider, move on. I realized watching her that she wasn't looking at wreckage. She was looking at materials. "This is salvage to you," I said, mostly to myself, since she couldn't understand me yet. 200 years of crashes and you've just been shopping. She looked over at the sound of my voice, not understanding the words, but reading something in my tone, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker across her face. Not quite amusement, but close. Then she walked to the open cargo hold, reached up without hesitation, and pulled down a length of cable that I'd written off as junk 30 seconds earlier. Examined it, coiled it with quick practice movements, slung it over her shoulder, moved on to the next thing. What followed was, strange as it sounds, one of the more pleasant mornings I'd had in a long time. We worked the wreck together, Lyra identifying things with the eye of someone who'd spent a lifetime turning other people's disasters into her own survival. Me providing context on what things actually were and whether they still worked. We didn't have a shared language, but we developed something else, a rhythm. I'd hold something up, she'd either take it or wave it off. She'd point at something I hadn't noticed, and half the time it turned out to be exactly the kind of thing worth taking. The light moved through the canopy as the morning went on, shifting from the amber of dawn to something clearer, whiter, dappling across the wreck and across Lyra's skin in shifting patterns. The mottled green-gray catching the light differently depending on the angle and almost as if it was responding to it. I found myself noticing that, filing it away as an observation, the way you'd notice anything unfamiliar. At least, that's what I told myself it was. Around midday, we stopped to rest in the shade of the wreck's intact wing, and Lyra produced food from a pouch at her hip, something dried, dark red, that smelled faintly sweet and earthy, like a dried fruit crossed with something I had no comparison for. She held a piece out to me. I hesitated. Alien food, unknown biochemistry, every survival protocol I'd ever been trained on, screaming caution. She watched me hesitate. Then, without changing her expression, she took a bite of the same piece herself, chewed, swallowed, held out the rest again. It was, I'll admit, a pretty effective argument. I ate it. It was good. Sweet, slightly tart, with a texture like dried apricot. Lyra watched me eat it with that, I was increasingly sure, was the alien equivalent of quiet satisfaction, and then went back to sort of salvage like the moment hadn't happened. But something had shifted. I trusted her with something small, my own safety, in the most literal sense. Food going into my body, and she'd offered it freely, without ceremony, the way you'd share food with someone you didn't expect to poison. On a planet that had killed everyone else who'd ever been here, that felt like it meant something. The afternoon brought the real first complication. I'd been working through the Wandering Dead's cargo hold, sorting through containers that had survived the crash, when I found the one I'd been simultaneously hoping to find and dreading. Drevac's cargo. 3 sealed containers, military grade, with markings I recognized. Not Terran, not standard commercial. The kind of markings that told you, without telling you anything specific, that whatever was inside was the reason a Veil patrol ship had been willing to chase an unmarked transport across the border. I hadn't opened them before the crash. Hadn't wanted to know. Some jobs, the less you know, the better you sleep. But now, sitting in the wreckage of my ship on a planet nobody was coming to rescue me from, with 3 containers that represented the only leverage I had if I ever did get off this rock, I was curious. I'd gotten the first container open, releasing a hiss of pressurized gas and revealing something packed in dark foam that I didn't immediately recognize. When Lyra appeared at the cargo hold entrance, she went rigid. Not the alert stillness from the night before, something sharper. She crossed the space between us in 3 steps, grabbed the container, and slammed it shut, hard enough that the sound echoed through the wreck. Then she looked at me, and for the first time since we'd met, she looked afraid. Not of me, of the container. She pointed at it, then made a gesture I didn't need translated, a sharp, emphatic no. The kind of no that comes with a history behind it. She said something, fast and urgent, and pointed past me toward the deeper jungle. Toward, I realized after a moment, roughly the direction we'd come from. The direction of the wreckage field. 200 years of wrecks. She was telling me something about the cargo, something connected to why this planet was a graveyard. I didn't understand the specifics, but I understood with sudden and complete clarity that whatever Drevec had been smuggling, it wasn't just illegal. It was the kind of thing that got people killed. Possibly for 200 years. possibly on this exact planet. We didn't go back to the containers. Lyra moved them, carefully, using the salvage cable, dragging all three well clear of the wreck and into a depression in the rock that she had been partially covered with debris. Out of sight, not gone, but contained in whatever sense that word meant on a planet like this. By the time she was done, the light had shifted again. Late afternoon now, long shadows. The gold of morning replaced by something deeper and more orange. The kind of light that makes everything look like it's already a memory. She sat down, heavily against a section of the hull, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked tired. Not just physically, though the day's work had been real work, but tired in a way that seemed to go deeper than muscles. I sat down near her. Not too close, close enough. We sat in silence for a while, watching the light change, listening to the jungle's evening sounds beginning to layer in over the daytime ones. At some point, I'm not sure exactly when, Lyra started talking. Not to me, not really. More like she was talking because the silence had gotten too heavy to carry alone. And even though I couldn't understand a word, having someone there to hear it mattered. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the shape of it, the rhythm, the places where her voice caught and then steadied again, like someone walking carefully around something sharp. Loss. Whatever she was telling me, underneath the words I couldn't translate, was about loss. I didn't say anything, didn't try to comfort her in a language she couldn't understand, which would have been more about making myself feel useful than actually helping. I just stayed. Sat there in the long orange light on a planet that had taken something from her, the way it had taken ships from everyone else who landed here, and let her talk. At some point she stopped, looked over at me, really looked. The way she had that morning when I had offered her the cable joke, but she couldn't understand. And for just a moment, in that orange light, with the jungle settling into evening around us, neither of us said anything at all. It didn't need translating. We made our way back to the overhang as the light failed, carrying what we could of the day's salvage. Lyra moved with the same efficient confidence as always, but something about the silence between us had changed. Less wary, more companionable, in the specific way that comes from two people who shared something neither of them can quite put into words yet. Partway back, we passed one of the older wrecks, a ship so overgrown it was barely recognizable, vines and that strange fast-growing moss having claimed most of the hull decades ago. Lyra slowed as we passed it, looked at it for a long moment. Then she did something she hadn't done before. She reached out, not toward me, but toward the wreck, and touched the hull, briefly, the way you might touch a gravestone, a small gesture, private. I didn't ask. I couldn't have, even if I wanted to. But I filed it away, the way I'd been filing away everything about her since the moment she tackled me out of a predator's path. There was more to Thessera Vex than a hostile planet with bad luck and worse predators. There was a history here, Lyra's history. Maybe more than just hers. And whatever was in those containers, whatever Dravik cargo actually was, Lyra had recognized it instantly, and it had frightened her in a way nothing else on this planet had. Not the predators, not the crash, not a stranger from the sky. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I was starting to think Thessera Vex's reputation, the planet nobody survives, might not be the whole story. might not even be the right story. That night, back on the overhang, Lyra did something new. She'd been teaching me words all evening, small things, pointing at objects, repeating sounds until I could approximate them. Rock, fire, which she made with a quick, practiced efficiency from materials. I hadn't even noticed her gathering. Sky. Each word a small brick in something we were building without either of us quite naming it. Before we settled in for the night, she pointed at herself, said her name again, Lyra, slow and clear. Then she pointed at me, waited. Coal, I said. She repeated it, got it almost right. Close enough that I understood, and somehow that felt like more than getting it exactly right would have. Then she pointed at both of us, at the fire between us, and said something. 2 words. Slow, deliberate, clearly something she wanted me to learn. I didn't know what it meant. Not that night. I'd learn, eventually, weeks later, when our shared vocabulary had grown enough for nuance. It was a phrase that didn't translate cleanly into any human language, which by that point didn't surprise me at all. The closest I ever got was something like, the ones who stayed. Not friends, exactly, not yet, that first night, but something, a category of 2. I fell asleep that night to the sound of the fire and the jungle, and, underneath it, Lyra's voice repeating those 2 words quietly to herself, like she was making sure she remembered them too. I had no idea yet what we were going to find beneath that planet's surface, had no idea how much those 2 words would come to mean, or how much they'd cost. But that night, under 2 moons, on a planet that had killed everyone else who'd ever been there, I wasn't afraid. For the first time since the crash, I wasn't afraid at all.